James Arness breaks his silence on John Wayne's final days and surprises everyone. James Arness was born James King Arness on 26th of May, 1923, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He grew up in a disciplined family with strong values and emotional restraint. His father, Rolf Arness, was a businessman of Norwegian descent, while his mother, Ruth Dusler, was a journalist. Both instilled in him a quiet, observational ability. Few people know that James Arness had no ambition to become an actor in his early years. After returning from World War II with a serious injury to his right leg, Arness carried the painful after effects for the rest of his life. It was this injury that caused him to walk slowly with a slight limp, which later inadvertently created his characteristic calm demeanor on screen. Hollywood came to Arness not as a dream pursued, but as an alternative path when other options had closed. In his early days in Hollywood, Arness was classified as a difficult actor to work with. His towering height made it difficult for him to pair with female co-stars, while his stern face lacked the emotional flexibility that was the standard at the time. Many studios considered him too cold, too silent, even unsuitable for leading roles. For years, Arness only received minor supporting roles in B-movies, science fiction films, and war films, projects that received little attention but honed his ability to control his physicality and gaze. Arness considered leaving Hollywood entirely in the early 1950s. He was disheartened by being typecast and felt he did not belong in this glamorous world. It was during this uncertain period that his relationship with John Wayne became crucial. Wayne not only saw potential in Arness, but also understood that his silence was an untapped strength, something that television cinema would need more than ever. When Gunsmoke was developed for television, many in the industry opposed the choice of Arness, believing him to be too serious and lacking in mass appeal. What few people knew was that CBS initially did not believe Arness could retain viewers in the long term. It was only after John Wayne publicly endorsed Arness in the premiere episode that the project was given the green light. This was one of the rare occasions Wayne used his personal credibility to protect another actor, and was also the biggest turning point in Arness's life. Throughout his 20 years with Gunsmoke, James Arness virtually sacrificed his film career to maintain the role of Matt Dillon. He turned down many major offers, rarely appeared in public, and did not leverage his fame to expand his influence like many other stars. What few people realized was that Arness viewed acting as a duty rather than a source of prestige. For him, his career journey was not about reaching the pinnacle, but about maintaining a role long enough for it to become part of American popular culture. The peak of James Arness's career did not come as an explosion, but rather as a slow accumulation. When Gunsmoke entered its first successful season, Arness was not immediately regarded as a major star. Television at the time still lagged behind cinema, and an actor staying too long with TV was even seen as a step backwards. Paradoxically, it was this very disregard that helped Arness quietly build a position that no one else had. The role of Marshal Matt Dillon gradually became a moral standard on American television. Not the fastest gunslinger, not the most romantic, nor the most glamorous, Arness's Dillon was a man who had to make difficult decisions in silence. Few people know that Arness often asked the writers to reduce dialogue and increase silences because he believed that the weight of power lay in the gaze and hesitation, not in words. This went against the television trends of the time, but created a unique identity for Gunsmoke. A little-known fact is that James Arness became one of the highest-paid actors in the United States, surpassing many film stars of his time. However, he did not use that position to control content or build a personal image. Arness declined production rights, refused to intervene in scripts to his own advantage, and rarely appeared in promotional campaigns. His peak existed in discretion, which was rare in Hollywood. While John Wayne represented the Western hero on the big screen, James Arness redefined this image on television. For millions of American viewers, Matt Dillon was not a character, but more like a familiar family member who appeared every week, aging over the years and facing increasingly complex problems. This is something that cinema cannot do, and it is also the reason why Arness became a cultural icon rather than just a successful actor. When Gunsmoke ended after 20 years, the peak of James Arness's career had completed a strange circle. He was at the height of fame, but was not worn down by it. He did not indulge in a lavish lifestyle or try to prolong his glory. Arness accepted his natural decline. His peak was not in awards or records, but in creating a masculine image so enduring that it became part of America's collective memory. On screen, James Arness was the embodiment of absolute steadfastness. Marshall, Matt Dillon, walked slowly, spoke little, made decisive decisions, and rarely let his emotions show. To millions of viewers, he was the image of an unshakable man who always knew what was right in a chaotic world. But behind the camera, Arness was a much more complex and fragile person than the role that defined his entire life. Few people knew that James Arness was not nearly as confident in real life as his character. He doubted himself, hated being the center of attention, and always felt uncomfortable with fame. While Matt Dillon appeared as an unquestionable moral icon, Arness, in real life, often questioned himself, agonized over personal choices and failures in his private life. His calmness on screen was not innate, but a shell built from discipline and control. Another paradox lies in how Arness dealt with violence. In Gunsmoke, guns were an unavoidable tool of justice. But in real life, Arness abhorred violence largely because of lingering memories from the war. He once suggested reducing unnecessary shootout scenes, replacing them with tense dialogue or endings that showed restraint. This made the character Matt Dillon gradually different from other cowboys of his time. He shot less and thought more. James Arness did not bring Matt Dillon's coldness into his personal life. On the contrary, he was vulnerable, found it difficult to express his emotions, but felt them deeply. It was this discrepancy between his inner self and his outward image that caused him many difficulties in his family relationships. The character in the film always knew what he had to do. The real person often lost his way in situations without a script. Ultimately, what made James Arness special was not that he resembled Matt Dillon, but that he used his own shortcomings to create that character. The silent slowness and caution in the film reflect a man constantly striving to balance responsibility and insecurity. Perhaps that is why Matt Dillon never becomes outdated. He is not a perfect model, but an image created from a real person with all his limitations, wounds, and self-discipline. In stark contrast to his image as a steadfast law enforcer on screen, James Arness's private life was a space full of contradictions and silence. He was extremely secretive, to the point that many colleagues who worked with him for decades knew little about his personal life. Arness believed that fame should stop at work. The rest of his life needed to be protected from the public eye. This view gradually made him one of Hollywood's most inaccessible figures. Arness's first marriage to Virginia Chapman began with high hopes, but quickly revealed cracks. The pressure of fame, the long filming schedule of Gunsmoke, and unhealed psychological wounds from the war created a silent distance between the two. Few people knew that Arness was often absent, from important family occasions, not because he was indifferent, but because he did not know how to balance his work obligations and personal feelings an issue he never learned to resolve. The greatest tragedy in James Arness's personal life was the story involving his son, a pain he deliberately avoided in every interview. Instead of exploiting or explaining, Arness chose absolute silence, considering it a boundary that no one could cross. For him, silence was not avoidance, but the only way to continue living without further damaging memories that were already too heavy. After his marriage broke up, James Arness did not seek attention from new relationships. It was not until many years later that he remarried Janet Surtees, a discreet, enduring relationship that was almost never seen in public. What few people realized was that Arness only truly found personal peace when he left the heights of fame behind, when he no longer had to carry the image of a cultural icon on his shoulders. In his later years, James Arness lived a simple life far from Hollywood, devoting his time to his family and tranquility. He did not write memoirs to expose his private life, nor did he exploit tragedy to tell his personal story. For Arness, his private life and marriage were not chapters to be explained to the public, but parts of his life he chose to keep to himself, as a final boundary between man and legend. For decades, James Arness hardly ever mentioned John Wayne's final days, not because he lacked memories, but because he understood the weight of the symbol Wayne had left behind. For Arness, talking about Wayne was not simply recounting a friend, but touching upon an image of masculinity deeply ingrained in the American psyche. Therefore, his prolonged silence was not avoidance, but a form of respect. When Arness finally spoke, what surprised many was not the tragic details, but the cold calmness with which he described John Wayne. According to Arness, in his final years, Wayne no longer wanted to talk about his career victories or fame. He became more reticent, avoided public appearances, and particularly hated being seen as someone who was weakening. Wayne was not afraid of death. What he feared was losing the image of the strong man that audiences had trusted for decades. A detail that is rarely mentioned is that John Wayne actively controlled how he was seen in his final days. Arness recounted that Wayne declined many visits not because he was distant, but because he did not want anyone to witness his transformation. For Wayne, privacy at that point was no longer a personal right, but the last way to protect the legend. Arness understood this and never pressured Wayne to explain or share. James Arness also acknowledged that there had been a silent distance between him and Wayne before Wayne passed away. It wasn't a major conflict, but rather the natural distance between two men who had taken different paths. One was attached to the big screen, the other belonged to television. But in Arness's memory, what remains is not those differences, but a deep respect for a man who chose to face the end in his own way, without lamenting, without seeking sympathy. Looking back, Arness does not call John Wayne's final days a tragedy. He sees it as the consistent conclusion of a man who lived fully with the image he created. Wayne did not depart as a fallen legend, but as a man determined to maintain his dignity until the very end. And perhaps that is why James Arness only spoke up when enough time had passed for the story not to harm the memory, but to make it more complete. Although this story is old, when placed in the year 2026, it is not old at all. On the contrary, it touches precisely on the core tensions of modern humanity. In 2026, the world lives in a state of image and emotion overload. Social media demands that people constantly reveal themselves, their opinions, their hurts, their happiness, their failures. Those who remain silent are seen as bland. Those who do not share personal stories are considered non-existent. He represents a generation that believes value lies not in how much one says, but in what one keeps to oneself. In an era where every tragedy is easily turned into content, Arness's choice to remain silent carries clear moral significance. The character in the film and the real Arness directly reflect the identity crisis of 2026. Today, each individual has at least two versions, the real-life person and the digital persona. Matt Dillon from Gunsmoke is like the public persona Arness was forced to maintain for 20 years, while his real self was full of wounds and contradictions. This is very close to the modern experience. The gap between the image presented and inner life is growing, and the price is often loneliness or mental exhaustion. The way James Arness spoke about John Wayne's final days is particularly relevant to 2026, an era re-examining traditional notions of masculinity. Wayne chose not to reveal his vulnerability, not out of shame, but because he understood what his image represented. Arness neither judges nor romanticizes this. Such neutrality is rare in an era that often forces every story to either glorify or dismantle. Here, the message is that people have the right to choose how they close their personal chapter. Ultimately, James Arness's story, when placed in the context of 2026, reminds us that not all values need to be updated with the times. In a noisy world, maintaining composure in an exposed culture is essential. James Arness's greatest legacy lies not in his representation of the past, but in posing a difficult question for the present: how silent are we willing to be to remain true to ourselves? Perhaps the most shocking thing is not what Arness revealed, but how he recounted it without judgment, without embellishment, just a belated farewell from one legend to another. James Arness teaches us a very simple lesson. It is not always necessary to speak out to prove one's existence. He lived his entire life in the spotlight, yet chose silence when it came to pain, family, and private losses. In an era where everyone is pressured to share, to tell their story, James's silence is not weakness, but a form of self-protection. There are things that, when kept to ourselves, do not make us smaller, but help us live more fully. The second lesson lies in how James Arness worked: just persistently do your job well, and time will speak for you. He did not seek to stand out, did not chase fame, and did not exploit his success to show off. For 20 years, he did only one thing: appear regularly, seriously, and responsibly. In today's world, where everyone wants things fast, wants a lot, wants to be seen immediately, that way of life reminds us that true value is often built slowly and is therefore lasting. And perhaps the biggest lesson from James Arness is that you don't have to be perfect to be a pillar of strength for others. He was not a happy man, nor was he always right in his personal life. But on screen and in the way he faced the world, James conveyed a sense of reassurance. This came from his honesty with himself, knowing his limitations and vulnerabilities, yet still choosing to live with kindness. Sometimes that alone is enough.